Hello everyone and welcome to this course on Microsoft Access 2019. My name's Deb and I'm your course instructor. I'm a MOS certified TAP accredited IT trainer and I've been using Access for a very long time along with all of the other Microsoft applications. And Access really is a product that's changed a lot in the last couple of versions. And what I plan to do in this course is just really to show you how Access can help you manage large amounts of data. Now, you might be thinking, who is this course exactly for? And when I was designing this course, I kind of broke it down into three separate groups. So the first group of people this course would be ideal for would be for people who have either never used Access or any kind of database software, and people who have certainly never designed or built a database. Now on that note, we are going to start completely from scratch, so I don't require you to have any existing knowledge in Access in order for you to be able to sit through this course. I do, however, require you to have at least a little bit of knowledge of the use of Windows software and applications. So for example, if you've used something like Excel or PowerPoint or Word before, that's fine. So I'm going to assume that you can at least find your way around a Windows application. The second group of people this course is designed for are people who have maybe used an older version of Access. This current version, Access 2019, could be very different from the version that you're used to using, particularly if it was Access 2010 or before that. You may not even have used Access with the ribbon interface that was introduced in 2010. And the third group of people that this course is designed for are users of more recent versions. So whilst you might be familiar with some of the later versions of Access, so maybe Access 2013 or 2016, you may not be used to some of the newer features in 2019, such as the creation and use of web apps. Now I am going to go through this whole course in sequence step by step, and I would advise you to do exactly the same. Some of the earlier sections are going to contain more introductory material where we'll go over a lot of the features and the views in Access, and then we'll work our way up through some of the more intermediate modules. Now the version I'm using is the desktop version of Access 2019, and there are some things that I'm not going to be covering in this course, such as VBA programming. Now we will be looking a little bit at macros, but we won't be going into VBA in any great depth. And the only thing that you really need in order to be able to work your way through this course is a live internet connection for some of the things such as online help and downloading templates. So that is it, we are ready to go. In the next section, I'm going to talk to you about acquiring Access 2019 and getting it working, so please join me for that. Hello again and welcome back to our course on Access 2019. In this module, we're going to take a look at how you can acquire Access. In other words, how you can download it onto your PC. And there are a couple of different ways, and as with everything in Microsoft, sometimes it does tend to look like it's a pretty confusing process due to the fact that Microsoft do tend to change up their website fairly frequently. So I just want to talk to you about the couple of options that you have in order to get the copy of Access on your PC. Now the first option is what you can see here, and that is to download a version of Office 365. Now, in case you're unsure exactly what Office 365 is, it's basically a subscription service. So for a certain amount of money, and you can either pay monthly or yearly, you can essentially rent your Microsoft applications from Microsoft. That's how I like to think about it. It's very similar to if you've ever used a subscription service like Netflix or Spotify. You pay Microsoft and you get access to download all of the Microsoft applications and use them. So what you can see here are a couple of the options that you have for purchasing Office 365 on the Microsoft website. And you can see just underneath it shows you which applications are included. So you do want to make sure that if you're purchasing this predominantly to get access to Access, that that application is actually included. And you can see it here, it's included with Office 365 Home and Office 365 Personal. And you'll see it says PC only next to each of these icons. What that basically means is that there's no mobile version of Acces included with these two subscriptions. So unlike the other applications like Word, Excel and PowerPoint, where you can go into your Office 365 portal and essentially use an online version of the applications, you can't do that with Acces, but you can certainly download it to your PC and use it in that way. Now, the good thing about Office 365 or purchasing an Office 365 subscription is that it means that your applications are always going to be up to date. They automatically receive updates when they're available from Microsoft, so you never have to worry about purchasing the next version because the version you have is always and consistently kept up to date. So that's why sometimes I feel that this is a good investment. Now, the second option that you have when it comes to downloading Acces is that you could choose to do a one-time purchase of Office. And you can see here I've got up on the screen a few of the different plans that you have. The cost is a lot higher, and this is a one-time purchase, which means you're not paying a monthly subscription. Once you pay your money, you download the software and it's yours to keep. However, just be aware that unlike Office 365, it doesn't receive constant updates. So it might be that you download this once, you use it for a couple of years, and then you need to repurchase it. So it's really up to you whether you choose to go the subscription route or if you go the one-time purchase route. Just make sure if you are doing a one-time purchase and you specifically want it to contain Acces, make sure that you go through and the version that you're buying does actually contain Acces. There are, of course, various other websites which offer a download of Acces 2019, so it is worth doing a little bit of research before you plump for one or the other options. I would say if you're just Googling trying to find a different resource for downloading Acces, then please be really careful as to which download source you use. Just make sure that it is a legitimate source before you pay any money and download the application. Once you've chosen which one of those options you want to go ahead with, then you can just click Buy Now and you'll be sent a download link for which you can download the software. And then you are pretty much good to go. So that's it, just some quick tips on how you can acquire Acces 2019. In the next module, we're going to talk a little bit about the structure of this course, so I will see you over there. Hello again and welcome back to our course on Acces 2019. Before we get started and jump into the content, I just want to take a few moments to explain to you the structure of this course. Now, this course is arranged in two sections, and in each section are modules with videos. Now, this course is designed to be followed in sequence, so try not to be too tempted to jump ahead. Now, saying that, if you have used a very recent version of Acces before coming to this course, there might definitely be some sections, particularly towards the beginning, where you might want to skip ahead. For example, we'll be discussing things in some of the earlier modules like how to use the Quick Access Toolbar and some things which are more generally related to Microsoft functionality as opposed to specifically Acces functionality. So if you are very used to using Microsoft products, there may definitely be some modules at the beginning which you can comfortably jump ahead of. I'm also going to be setting some exercises throughout this course, and not only will I show them to you, but we will also do them together. And I'm going to save my own copy of the exercises in the exercises files folder, and you'll find a downloadable link for that under the relevant section in this course. So make sure that you're familiar with those and you know where they are located. And the contents will look something similar to this. And as I said, we will be referring to these files in the course. I'll also be doing some demonstrations throughout this course, and what we're essentially going to be doing is we're going to be developing a very straightforward database. And the files I use for that will be in the course files folder, which will look something like what you see on the screen right now. So again, make sure you're familiar with where those are located and save them off to your PC. And I recommend that you use these files to work along with me with. So hopefully that gives you more of an idea as to how this course is structured and the files that we're going to be using. That's it for this section. I will see you in the next one where we'll be talking about how you can use database templates. Hello again, this is Deb and welcome back to our course on Acces 2019. It's now time to start using Acces. So what we've got here is just a blank desktop. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to search for Acces using my search at the bottom here. Now I'm using Windows 10, so if you're using a different version of Windows, then it might be slightly different. But I'm just going to type in Acces. And you can see there the app is the first one listed. So I can click it just to open it. But because I'm going to be using Acces all the time, what I prefer to do is right click and I'm going to select Pin to Taskbar. And what that will do is it will pin the Acces app to my taskbar at the bottom here so that I can access it whenever I need. It just makes it a little bit easier. I don't have to go in and search for it every single time. So I would recommend that if you are using Windows 10, Windows 8, Windows 7, that you do pin it to your taskbar. So I can now just go in and click on the Acces icon and that will open up the application. So this is where you'll be taken when you first open up Acces, and this is what we call the start screen. And there are some buttons on here which should look fairly familiar if you're used to using other Microsoft applications. So if you just glance your eyes up to the top right hand corner, you'll see we have a little question mark just there which will allow you to access the Acces help. You could also press the F1 shortcut key to get into that. We have our minimize if you want to minimize the application, our restore down or restore up button, and we also have our close button in the top corner. I also have there my account details. So if I wanted to see more about that, I could jump into there. So those should be reasonably familiar to you if you're used to using other Microsoft applications. We then have a menu bar on the left hand side. You can see currently home is selected. And what I have on this home page is I have a number of different templates that I can select, and the ones that you can see here aren't by any means all of them. If I want to see the whole lot of templates I have on offer, I can click that More Templates link on the right hand side. I'm going to come back to that in a moment. I just want you to cast your eyes underneath that. So we have a Recent and a Pinned tab. Now, if this is the first time you're opening Acces and you haven't created any databases yet, then your recent list is going to be blank, much like mine is just here. If I click on Pinned, you'll also see that that's blank. Now, when I start creating a database, what I could do if I wanted to is I could choose to pin it, and it will then appear underneath this pinned section. So in general, the kinds of databases that you might want to pin would be ones that you use frequently. So it just enables you to access them, get to them a lot quicker. I then also have options in the left-hand menu for creating a new database and also for opening an existing database. So if I have one stored off somewhere on my local drives or maybe in the cloud, OneDrive for example, I could go in here and I could browse to that database to open it. Now I'm going to click on New for the time being because we're going to direct our attention to the different templates that we have available. And in Acces 2019, databases can be of two types. You can have a desktop database, which is more of your traditional kind of database, which sits on your desktop, and you would in general use it locally for maintaining databases. And alternatively, there is the web app, which is a database that is used online that you can share with others. Now, the reason why you might want to use a template is that it's a really good kind of jumping off point. So instead of just being faced with a blank database that you need to construct yourself, you might want to have a starting point that you can build on. And there are a whole host of templates available to you within Acces. And you can see some that we have here. These are some of the more popular ones you might want to use. There is obviously a blank database, which you could use. We've got asset tracking, contacts, students, event management, so on and so forth. So it really depends on the type of database that you want to create as to which one of these is going to be most useful to you. If I scroll down, you can see eventually we do get to the end of the templates. Now, if you can't find what you're looking for just here, you do have a search bar at the top to search for more templates. So if I was searching for contacts, let's just type that in. I'm going to click the magnifying glass. That's going to go away. It's going to search all of the available Acces templates, and it's going to pull back any that are kind of related to or might be useful if I want to create a database of contacts. To come out of here, just click on that little backlink and it will take you back to that main starting template page. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to use one of these templates, and we are going to use this one just here, the contacts template. So let's click on that. Now, what I'm presented with when I select my template is I can see a preview essentially of what that contact list database is going to look like. Obviously, it's fairly blank at the moment. I also have a description on the right-hand side. So it says provided by Microsoft Corporation, and then I have quite a lengthy description as to what this database is all about. So essentially, it creates and maintains a comprehensive database of your customers, partners, and vendors using this popular template. It then shows me the download size. So this is a fairly small template at 143K. And underneath that, I then have an option here for choosing my file name. So essentially what I want this database to be called. And the information I have in there currently is really just the default name that Acces assigns to this database. So it says database1.acdb, and it's worth noting that acdb is the file extension for databases in Acces. And then underneath that, it shows me the path or where this database is going to be stored. So I can see currently that it's going to be stored on my C drive in my documents folder. And if I wasn't happy with that, I could go in and I could use this browse button and choose a different location in which to store that database. Now, I'm not going to change anything at this stage. We're going to actually save this database using a different name later on. So I'm happy with those defaults. Now, one thing else to point out before we actually create this database is just these arrows that we have on the right and left-hand side. If I want to scroll through more of the templates, I can click this arrow and it will take me to the next template along. So if I wasn't particularly sure that that contacts database was exactly what I wanted, I could use my arrows and go through and see if there's another template that's more appropriate. Now I'm just going to go back because I am happy with that contacts database. And I'm going to accept all these defaults, and I'm going to click that big create button in the middle there. So what we're looking at now is a contact list or a contact management database, and it's fairly empty at the moment. We haven't added any contacts into here yet, but it gives me a really good starting point for which to start my contact list. So you can see here it has definitions for the information that I will need to have in this contact list. So you can see here it's got first name, last name, company, job title, category, email address, business phone, home phone, mobile, zip. So some basic fields that I can go in and I can complete. And of course you can modify these, you can remove fields you don't want, and you can add fields that you do want, which we'll get into later on in the course. Now, the panel on the left-hand side that you can see here tells you what's included in this template. So you can see that we have some tables, some queries, forms, reports, macros, and modules. And again, I'm going to explain what each of those mean during the course. But this in general is typical of what you will see when you open up a template. Now it's worth noting that sometimes when you open a template you may receive a security warning. Acces does tend to default to being rather cautious when you're opening new files. So before you run it, you need to consider where that template came from. So the one that we've just opened was from the Microsoft website. It's an official template, so I'm pretty sure that that is a safe place to download this template from. However, if you've got your template from some other source, you might want to proceed with a little bit of caution. You don't want to download something horrible onto your PC in the form of a template. So just be aware of that. And if you do get a security warning pop up, if you determine that it does come from a safe location, just click the Enable Content button when you see that warning message. Now what I'm actually going to do is I'm just going to close this database down again. And I'm going to reopen Acces. And I just want to show you that now, because we've created a database, underneath Recent, you can see our database sitting there. So let's click on it to reopen it. And this is what you'll see sometimes, is you'll get a welcome screen, and it really kind of walks you through what the context database is all about. So you have some information just here, and you also have a little video if you want to watch that. And all this screen does is it really gives you information on how to use this template. Now it's worth noting, and the reason why I've kind of shown you this is that you can create your own help screens and welcome screens as well, which can sometimes be particularly useful if you're sharing a database that you've created with other people. So it gives them an idea of how they can use that database. Again, I'm not going to get too much into that at the moment, but I really did think that that was worth highlighting so you know that you can do that. So I'm just going to close this window down. And I'm actually going to close all of Acces down again in preparation for our next module. So that's this module done. What we're going to move on to in the next module is saving and opening databases. So please join me for that. Hello again, this is Deb and welcome back to our course on Acces 2019. In the previous module, we looked at those different Acces templates and we opened up the first contacts list database. So now what I want to talk about in this module is how you can create, save and open databases. So we're starting off back at that home screen. And if you look now underneath recent, you can see that we have our database1.acdb, which was that contacts database that we created in the previous module. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to double click to open that database. And again, as we discussed previously, you will get a welcome screen, which I'm just going to close by clicking on the cross at this moment in time. So now I have this contact management database open, and we did give it a rather generic name. We took a default name of database1. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to save this and give it a different name of my choosing. So I'm going to go to File, I'm going to go down to Save As, and I'm going to save this just as a regular database. So that's the default option just here with the ACDB extension. And I'm going to click Save As. Now you'll see what I get here is a little warning message which says all open objects must be closed prior to continuing this operation. So what that actually means is if I just close that down and click the back arrow to go back to my database, I actually have to essentially close down this database in order to save it, which kind of seems a little bit counterintuitive. But I'm going to go all the way over to the right hand side and you'll see just here we have a little cross, and as I hover over it says Close Contact List, which will essentially close that database and all the attached objects. I can now go back to File, down to Save As, and click the Save As button again. And this time it's going to let me save this database in a location of my choosing. And I'm going to save this in the Course Files folder. And I'm going to call it Contacts 01. I'm happy with that ACDB file extension and I'm going to click on the Save button. Again, I'm going to close down the welcome screen, and what you'll see is that you will get a security warning at the top here. So all you need to do there is just click Enable Content. And I'm going to close down all of Acces one more time and I'm going to reopen. So let's click on Acces from my taskbar. So this time when we open up Acces, you can now see under Recent, I have those two separate databases. So even though they are essentially the same at the moment, we've got two separate file names, two separate databases. And you can see Contact01 has the path name of where that file is actually stored underneath. Now, obviously, if I wanted to go back in and just start working on that contacts database, I can double click to open it. But if I wanted to open a different database, I would go to the Open button from my menu on the left-hand side. And what you can also see in there is my contacts database and my database 1 that we've created, so I can open from there as well. But alternatively, if I have another database stored off, I could choose a location from which to open it. And this will really depend on what services you have access to. So you will be able to browse locally on your PC. And if you are connected to cloud storage, so maybe something like OneDrive, like I am just here, you can go straight in there and open an Acces database that you have saved to the cloud. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to go back to New. And we're going to create a new blank database. So we're essentially going to start from scratch to work on the course database that I'm going to use for most of the demonstrations in this course. So let's click on blank. So again, you can see that this new blank database has a default file name and file location. Now I'm actually going to change this because I want to save this into the course files folder. And I'm going to change the file name at this point as well. And this database that we're going to be creating is essentially for a travel company that runs some rather exclusive tours. And the name of the travel company is Esprit de Tour. So I'm going to change this file name. I'm going to delete out database 2 and we're going to call it Esprit de Tour. And this database is going to go through a few different versions. So let's add 01 on the end just there and click on Create. And there we go. We've created our first new blank database. Now, one thing that you may notice is if you look at the top, you'll see that the file name is very long at the top there. So where it says Esprit de Tour 01, and it then has database, and then a very long path name as to where that database is saved. And that looks a little bit messy there at the top of the screen. Now, we're going to sort that out later on. I'm going to show you how you can make that look a lot neater. Now, what you're actually looking at when you open up a blank database is basically a single table. And this is where you create your database. And at the moment, it has nothing in it. And we're going to build on this throughout the course. Now, one other thing to show you just before we leave this module is that when I click on File, one option I have there is Close. So let's click on Close. And what you'll see is that it doesn't actually close Acces, it only closes the current database. So I just wanted to point that out because sometimes that can be a little bit confusing. You're never sure if you're closing the file or if you're going to close Acces entirely. So in this instance, it closes the current database that you have open, but leaves the Acces application open. So that's about it for this module. In the next module, we're going to be talking about the Acces Workspace and the Backstage area, so please join me for that. Hello again and welcome back to our course on Acces 2019. In this module, we're going to take a look at the Acces Workspace and we're also going to delve into the Backstage area. And really the aim of this module is really just to give you a tour around the Acces Workspace and get you familiar with some of the features and functionality. Now we're starting off again back at our start screen. You should be reasonably familiar with this now. And if you look at what we're looking at here, so underneath Recent, our list of databases is getting ever longer. Each time we go in, we have a new database that we've created listed there. And eventually this list will start to get so long that databases will drop off the bottom of that list. So it will be a little bit harder for you to find recently used databases. Now, one way that you can get around that, and I did mention this in an earlier module, is to pin databases that you use frequently. So for example, if I hover over Esprit de Tour, you can see that I get this little pin icon. If I hover over it, says pin this item to the list. Now, I'm not going to do that at this moment, but if I was to do that, what would happen is that Esprit de Tour would then always be available underneath this pinned tab just here. So again, it's just a really quick way of being able to access those databases you use frequently so that they don't drop off the bottom of the list. Now, what we're actually going to do first is that we're going to go back into our contacts database. So I'm going to double click to open contacts. Again, I'm going to close down this welcome screen, and we're just going to do a quick tour of some of the main features of the workspace, just in case you're not familiar with them. Now, I will say that if you are very familiar with Microsoft products, so maybe something like Excel or Word or PowerPoint, particularly in the later versions, 2016, 2019, even 2013, then you might be able to skip over this module. If you're not familiar with those versions, or if you just like a refresher, then stick with me because that's what we're going to go through now. So starting at the top here, we have what we call a ribbon, and ribbons are organized onto different tabs. So you can see here, I currently have the Home tab selected. We have a Create tab, we have an External Data tab, Database Tools, and Help. So each of these tabs contains what we call a ribbon, and a ribbon is this list of commands or different groups of commands running horizontally across the top of your workspace. And these tabs will change depending on what exactly it is that you're doing at any given time. So we do have something called contextual tabs or contextual ribbons. And those are ribbons which only appear when they are needed. So if I'm doing something to do with a table, it might be that I get at the top here a Table Tools ribbon, which I can't currently see because I don't need it. So just be aware of that. These tabs aren't fixed. They will change depending on what it is that you're doing. But these ones you can see now are the standard tabs for Acces. And on each tab, we have groups, and within those groups, we have commands. Something else we also have is if you glance above those tabs, we have something called the Quick Access Toolbar, and it's right here, right in the top left-hand corner. And currently when I hover over my Quick Access Toolbar, I can see a save icon, I can see undo, and I can see redo. And I also have a little drop down up here which will allow me to customize that Quick Access Toolbar. Now, the Quick Access Toolbar will either be right at the top of the screen, or if you prefer, you can display it underneath your ribbon. And I actually prefer to have it underneath the ribbon. So I'm going to select Show Below the Ribbon to move it down here. I just find that's a little bit easier for me to see. Now, what the Quick Access Toolbar is it's somewhere where you can add commands that you use frequently so that they're easy to access. So you're not hunting around through the different tabs and ribbons for a particular command. And you can customize this until your heart's content, and you can access pretty much every single command that's available in Acces to add it to your Quick Access Toolbar. And I'm really going to cover how you can customize this Quick Access Toolbar in a later module. So just hold that thought for now. Let's jump right down to the bottom. So right down here, we have what we call our status bar. And this status bar can also be customized. So if I right click my mouse on the status bar, you'll see that I have lots and lots of different things ticked. And this is really informational for you. So for example, I've got caps lock ticked, which means that when I turn my caps lock on, you can see in the status bar, it tells me that I have caps lock on. So that can be really very useful. I'm just going to turn my caps lock off, and you'll see that that disappears. So there's lots of pieces of information that you can choose to display in that status bar at the bottom just by either checking or unchecking in that customized status bar menu. Now let's move on to this navigation panel that we have running down the left-hand side. This is really what we call the nerve center of our database. It basically lists all of the objects that are available in your database, and you can see that they're categorized. We have tables, queries, forms, reports, macros, and modules. And these can be collapsed or expanded to see the information. So if you have quite a lot of information in this panel and you're only particularly interested in tables, you could collapse up all of the others just to make it a little bit easier for you to see. So you have those little chevrons in order to be able to do that. So these chevrons to collapse and expand particularly come into their own if you have a very large complex database where you might have hundreds and hundreds of objects. Now, most of the time this navigation pane will be open, but if it's becoming a nuisance or you don't have any need for it at a particular time, you can click on the little chevrons at the top here just to kind of minimize that. It doesn't close it, you can still see navigation pane just there. And of course you can click on those chevrons again to bring that navigation pane back. You can also change the width of it. So if I hover my mouse just over that divider, I can drag it out or I can drag it back in again. What you also have in here is a little search box. So it might be that you need to maybe search for a form or a report or a query. And you can do that just using this search facility at the top. So you can type in your search criteria, click on the magnifying glass, and it will find it in your navigation pane. And another thing you have in this navigation pane is this little drop-down arrow. If I click it, it gives you a number of other options to help you find and deal with objects. Now in the main window that you can see, we have our contact list. And this looks a little bit like an Excel spreadsheet. It's not in fact a table, it is actually what we would call a form. And if you look in the navigation pane, we have contact list just here, which is what we're currently looking at. And in the contacts list, each row represents one line of data. So essentially, each contact that we add will occupy a row. Now the other forms that we have here, welcome, that controls the welcome screen that comes up whenever we reopen our Acces database. And we're going to take a quick look at contact details. Now to open this form, if I right click on it, and I can select open. Now alternatively, I could have just double clicked and that would also open the contact details form. So what this shows is all of the detail for one contact on one form. So you might use something like this in something like an application where you're going to ask someone to update their contact details. Now, both the contact list and the contact details are forms, but they're very different types of forms. You can see that when I open this contact details, it kind of opens in a new window and it looks like it's hovering over the top. So let me just close that down. And apart from opening a form, there are other options that you can go into. So for example, if I right click again on contact details, I have the option of going into design view. And you can see straight away that this is a very different thing altogether. This is where I could go in to design that particular form, so I can make changes to it essentially. So if I wanted to, I could go in and I could do things like grab this little section here and I could move it around, so I can just pick it up and I can drag it down and drop it, so I can really change the design of that particular form. So forms are very different when you're in design mode to a form in what we call open mode or run mode. Now, once I've made my changes to my form and I'm happy with it, I can then close this form down by clicking on that little cross in the top right-hand corner. And of course, it's going to ask me if I want to save the changes to the design of my form contact details. Now, in this case, I'm going to say no, and I'm just going to close out of that. So the point I'm trying to make here is that sometimes we'll open forms to use them to add information into our database, and sometimes we'll open them in design mode. So now I'm back to my contact list, and again I'm going to very quickly just close contact list down. I'm going to click on the contact list form in the navigation pane. I'm going to right click and jump into that design view again. And again, you can see here, I can go in and I can make some changes to the actual design of that form. Let's close that down. Now, everything I've said there with regards to design view is equally true of all of the other objects. So it's true of reports. You can run or change the design of some reports, the same for queries, macros, and tables. And we're going to look at all of those throughout this course. So let's move on now back to having a tour of our workspace. So we were looking at the ribbon tabs earlier, which we have running across the top. And to the left, you'll see that there is a tab that says File. Now, this isn't actually a ribbon, essentially. If we click on File, it takes us into what we call the Backstage area. And this is where you'll find a lot of your, what we would call administration tasks for your database. So we've already explored Home, New, and Open previously. We're now in the Info tab. And we're going to go into some of the options which we have in Info a little bit later on. We have Save As. Again, that's something that we've already utilized. We have Print, which will allow us to print our database, select a printer, or even print preview our database before we print it. And we have a Close option. As we saw before, that will close down your current database. It won't close down Acces. And then right at the bottom, we have an Account option. And this shows which account is currently being used for this copy of Acces 2019. And it also shows me that I have OneDrive connected just here. On the right-hand side, I have Office Updates, and it's always really important to make sure that your copy of Acces is always up to date. So just be aware of that. And I can also do things in here, some more fun things like change my Office background. I have numerous different things I could select. And I can also change my Office theme. So currently I have colourful, but I could go for dark grey if I wanted a completely different look. We also have black, and that one is new for 2019. And we have white. So again, that's really personal preference. We then have a feedback tab, which will allow you to send either good, bad, or suggestions to Microsoft. And then finally at the bottom, we have an options area. And options is made up of a number of different pages with settings that make your copy of Acces work as you like it. And we're going to talk a lot more and explore some of these options later on. There's a whole host of features in here which will really allow you to set up Acces in a way that works for you. So we're going to come back to that a bit later. So that is the end of this section. In the next section, we're going to talk a little bit about online help and the new Tell Me feature. So please join me for that. Hello again, and welcome back to our course on Acces 2019. In this module, we're going to be talking about online help and the Tell Me feature. Now, before I do, let's go back into our contacts database by double-clicking. And we're going to deal with something that's probably been annoying you up until this point, which is this welcome screen. Now, it is a really useful screen, particularly if it's the first time that you're opening the database. But if you're just closing and reopening fairly frequently, it can get a little bit annoying to have to keep coming in and closing down this welcome screen. So let's look at how we can deal with that first of all. So I'm going to close it down and I'm going to go over to my navigation pane. And underneath tables, I'm going to go to settings. And when you double click on settings, you'll see that there is one row in this table. And the second column says show welcome screen. If I was to make that a little bit bigger, or sorry, show welcome. And you can see that it has a tick in that box. So if I go in and just uncheck this, the next time I open this database, that welcome screen won't be shown. So I'm going to close down this settings table and I'm going to say yes. And I'm also going to close down this contact list form. So now what I want to discuss is help in Acces 2019. And all of the help is located online. So that means that you're going to need an active internet connection in order to be able to access help. Now, the quickest way to access help in Acces 2019 is to press the F1 key on your keyboard. And you'll see you then get this pane on the right-hand side where you can go in and you can browse through the different categories, or you can type in your search criteria, so what it is that you require help on, into that field that's flashing at the top. Now, if I wanted to browse, I could click on, for example, Get Started, and it will go through, and I have a little video there of how to create a database in Acces. And it's worth noting that you can pull this panel out. So if you're finding it quite small, if you hover your mouse over the top until you get that double-headed cursor, you can drag the panel out like so, and you can also resize it to make that a little bit bigger. If I want to go back to my category list, I have a little arrow just here, which will take me back to those main categories. And just to reiterate the point that I mentioned before, this help is online, so you do require an active internet connection. Now, a good place to start might be to find out a little bit more about some of the new features in Acces 2019. So I could go up to my search bar at the top here and type in what's new in Acces 2019 and press the Enter key. And I can see that the top link there is probably going to be quite useful to me. So let's have a little click. And we can go through and we can look at all of the new features that have been added to Acces since the last version. So that's a really, really useful thing. And I would say if you are new to Acces 2019, definitely go into help and definitely have a look through this, because it's really going to give you a good idea of some of the new stuff that you can expect. So again, let's click on the back arrow to go back to our menu. And if you just want to browse through these categories, you can. So if I click on tables, you can see I have a whole host of other links. So again, it really depends what you're looking for help on. So really do utilize that search facility in help at the top. So that's your online help. By pressing the F1 key on your keyboard, you can access that. So let's just close this down for the time being. I want to now talk to you about something called contextual help. So what that means is that if you're doing something and you access help, you can access it at a point that is relevant to what you're doing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open the contact list form. So I'm going to go to File, I'm going to go to Open, and we're going to select Contacts. Now, one thing you may already be familiar with if you've used other Microsoft applications is the notion of contextual help. And whilst contextual help is available in Acces 2019, it's not as, shall we say, prevalent as it was in some of the previous versions. But what contextual help essentially means is that if you're doing something and you need help, you access it at the point that is relevant to what you're doing. So for example, I've opened my contact list form and I'm going to go up and look at the ribbon, and I'm going to go to this text formatting group at the end of the home ribbon and just click the down arrow, which is going to take me into my datasheet formatting options. So if I was in here and I decided that I needed help on datasheet formatting specifically, you'll see that I have the little question mark in the top bar just here, and when I hover over it says help. So if I click on it, now what you'll see here is that when I've clicked on that, it's basically taken me to a web browser and it's taken me to that standard help homepage. So let's just close that down and jump back to Acces, close out of here. And this time I'm going to go to a different part of Acces. So let's go to Database Tools. And I'm going to click on Relationships, and I'm going to click on the question mark again. And this time it takes me to help that is relevant to the task I will be performing. So the reason why I've shown you those two different examples is really just to illustrate the fact that it is a little bit patchy and inconsistent with regards to if you're going to go to a help page that's specifically directed at the thing you're trying to do, or if it's just going to take you to that standard help homepage. Of course, remember, if you do go to that standard homepage, you can just type into the search box exactly what it is that you're looking for, but just be aware that it can be a little bit flaky in that regard. Finally, I want to talk to you about the new Tell Me feature in Office 2019. Now, I say new, this was included in the previous version as well, so in Acces 2016. And you'll find it up here, so it's next to your ribbons essentially, and it's this little kind of search box that says tell me what you want to do. And as I hover over, you'll see there is a shortcut key of Alt plus Q, and it says just start typing here to bring features to your fingertips and get help. So let's pretend that I have forgotten how to create a table. So I'm going to type in create table, and you'll see as I type it tries to match it with actions or commands that are available in Microsoft Access 2019. So if I'm creating a new table, table design is really the command that I want, and I can see that I have it there. So if I click on it, it's going to take me into that particular option. Now it's also worth noting, if we click back in Tell Me and type in Create Table again, I do also have access to further help from here as well. So again, whenever you type in some search terms, you'll get a list of actions that you can take, but then also at the bottom, you'll get a list of help topics. And if I just push that arrow out to the side, you can see I've got my help topics just there. So that's another way of kind of getting into that contextual help. And I am just going to tidy this up and close down those tables that I no longer need. So those are the different ways that you can utilize help. Biggest thing to take away here is to quickly access help, press the F1 key on your keyboard. That's the end of this section. I will see you in the next one where we'll be talking about the ribbon structure a little bit more. So I'll see you over there. Hello again and welcome back to our course on Access 2019. In this module, we're going to be discussing the ribbon. Now, we already briefly took a look at the ribbon in a previous module, but I want to go into a little bit more detail now and also show you some useful shortcuts for navigating around and utilizing the ribbon. So the ribbon that you have in Access 2019 is pretty much similar to the other Microsoft applications. And this ribbon structure was introduced all the way back in Office 2007. And it was introduced to replace the menu system. If you can remember back that far, we used to have menus running across the top. You'd click and you'd get some drop-down options. So now all of our commands are organized horizontally in what we call ribbons running across the top of your screen. And it makes it easier to locate and use your commands and settings. So your ribbon is this big bar, which you can see here at the top. And your commands are divided into different tabs. So I'm currently clicked on the Home tab, and you can see the ribbon and all of the commands. We have Create, External Data, Database Tools, and finally Help. Now these are the standard ribbons that you'll see when you open up Access 2019, but they aren't the only ribbons that you have access to. And again, I mentioned this in a previous module. You will see from time to time what we call contextual ribbons, which will appear as and when they are needed. Now, in order to move through your ribbons, you can just click on them as I did just then. Alternatively, if you have a scroll wheel on your mouse, you can just scroll. So I'm scrolling down and that will move me across those ribbons, or scroll up to go back through them. Another alternative way of navigating through your ribbons and the commands on those ribbons is to press the Alt key on your keyboard. And what you'll see there is I get some shortcut keys essentially, which will allow me to navigate using my keyboard only. So for example, if I wanted to go to the Create tab, I can press C and it will jump me across to there. And then I get a whole new set of shortcut keys that I can use to access whichever command I want. If I want to get rid of them, I just press Alt again and it will take me back to my normal mode. Now on each tab, you'll see that we have different groups. So again, I'm on the Create ribbon and you can see the different groups we have. The group names are listed at the bottom. So we have templates, tables, queries, forms, reports, and macros and codes. And you can see that these are separated by a vertical dividing line. So this just groups together commands which kind of essentially belong together, just to make it a little bit more organized and easy for you to see. Now I'm going to jump back across to the Home ribbon for a moment. Now, I will say that what you're seeing on my screen might differ slightly on yours, and it all depends on your screen resolution. So at the moment, because I have quite a large screen resolution, I can see all of my groups and all of my commands. However, if yours is a little bit more squashed up, you might see that these commands will be rearranged ever so slightly. So don't worry too much if yours looks slightly different to mine. It could be just down to the screen resolution or screen size that you're using. Another thing to point out is if we look at this clipboard group as an example, you can see here within this group that the Cut, Copy and Format Painter are currently grayed out, which means that they're not available for me to use at this time. Now that's because I can't actually use these. So I haven't clicked anywhere in order to be able to use Cut, Copy or Format Painter. If I click in my contact list database, you should have seen some more of these commands in other groups became active because I can now use them. If I had some text in this cell where I'm currently clicked, I would be able to highlight it and then cut would become available. But because I have nothing highlighted at the moment, I don't have my cut option available. The same thing for copy and the same thing for format painter. So these will be deactivated when you can't use them or don't need them and activated when they are available. Now, some controls on the ribbon will bring up a dialog box. So for example, let's go to this big group at the end here, the text formatting group. I have numerous different options here for text formatting. A lot of these you're probably fairly familiar with, such as bold, italic, underline, etc. But if you look in the corner, we have this little sort of diagonal arrow, and that's our dialog launcher. So if I click it, you'll see that I get a whole host of other options underneath there as well. So watch out for those little launchers in the bottom corner because it will normally give you more options or some other advanced options. Now, I mentioned earlier, and I've mentioned a couple of times in the course so far, these contextual ribbons, which only appear when they're needed. So currently, I just have these 5 tabs at the top: Home, Create, External Data, Database Tools, and Help. Now, I'm going to switch into a different view. I'm going to go into the Design view for the Contact Details form. So I'm going to right-click on my form and I'm going to go into Design View. And now that I've changed my view and I'm in design mode, if you look up at your ribbons, you'll see what I mean. I now have this large ribbon that says Form Design Tools, and it has 3 sub-ribbons: Design, Arrange, and Format. And these have appeared because I've gone into Design View. So these are now relevant buttons that I can use. So there's lots of controls in here which I can add to my form. Remember, in this view, I'm designing or changing the layout of my form. And there's lots of different options that I can add. The point I want you to take away here is that you will see these contextual ribbons appear from time to time as and when they're needed. So a lot of these commands weren't relevant or weren't useful to me before I went into Design View, which is why I didn't see all of these form design tools. So in a way, it's Microsoft's way of decluttering the screen for you, only presenting you with options as and when you need them. So again, if you look at these 2 tabs, the 2 different forms that I have open, so I'm currently clicked on Contact Details. Now watch what happens to this contextual ribbon when I click on Contact List. You can see it disappears because those tools are not needed in this particular form. Now, one thing I will say about this ribbon is that it does take up a little bit of room on your screen. So if you're doing something and you don't particularly need to use your ribbon at that moment in time, or if you just want to temporarily hide the ribbon, you can do that. So if you go over to the right-hand side, you'll see that you have an up arrow. And when I hover over it, it says collapse the ribbon. Control F1 is the shortcut key for that. If I click it, it will just collapse that ribbon all the way up there. If I want to bring it back, all I need to do is click on one of the tabs. So if I click on Home, it brings that ribbon back. Now it's only temporary. You'll see that if I click back onto my form, the ribbon disappears again. So if I now want to lock that ribbon back in place, I need to go over to the right-hand side again and click on the push pin to lock that ribbon down once again. Now, of course, you can customize the ribbon to suit how you want to use it, and you would do that by going into File and going down to Options. And you'll see in there you have an option, or you have a menu item for customizing the ribbon. And this will allow you to remove groups and commands from your ribbons, or even create new tabs, new groups, so on and so forth. Now, I'm not going to go into detail as to how you do this. That might be something which you can look up if you really want to learn how to customize your ribbon and set it up for you. So I think I'm going to leave that as kind of a little piece of additional homework for you to do. But just be aware that if you do want to do that, this is where you would come to customize your ribbon. Now, another thing that you can customize, and again, we did mention this briefly earlier on, is your quick access toolbar. And that was this little toolbar which lurks underneath, or in some cases above, your ribbons. And I have a few commands on there at the moment. And in the next section, what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at how you can customize this quick access toolbar so that all of the commands you use frequently are super easy and quick to access. So that's enough about the ribbon. I will see you in the next section. Hello again and welcome back to Acces 2019. In this module, we're going to take a look at the Quick Access Toolbar, and I've pointed this out to you quite a few times so far in this course. But what I really want to show you in this module is just how you can customize it to suit your own needs. Now, as we've mentioned before, the Quick Access Toolbar, you'll either find it above your ribbon in the top left-hand corner, but if you remember, I moved mine to below my ribbon so I can see it just here. And currently, I only have 3 commands on my Quick Access Toolbar. That is Save, Undo, and Redo. Now, if I click the drop down on the end there, this pulls up the Customize Quick Access Toolbar menu. And you can see that the commands that I currently have on my Quick Access Toolbar, or QAT for short, are currently ticked. So Save, Undo, and Redo. And I have a list of 10 or so there, most popular commands that I could very quickly add to my Quick Access Toolbar just by selecting them and essentially putting a tick next to them. So for example, if I wanted to add a spell check, I could click on spelling to add that to my Quick Access Toolbar, and it just makes it a lot easier for me to find when I need it. Now, aside from these standard few that we have listed, you can actually add any command that's available within Acces to your Quick Access Toolbar. And you do that by going down to More Commands. Now, this should jump you across to a fairly familiar area. Once again, this is something we've been into a couple of times already. And this is essentially your access options again. And it's taking you directly to that Quick Access Toolbar area. Now, what you have at the top is you have an option of what you can choose. So currently, I have popular commands displayed in this list below. And it's worth noting when you are searching for a particular command that these lists are displayed in alphabetical order, which does make it a little bit easier. So this is what Acces determines to be the most popular commands. However, you can change that. If we click the drop down, you can select to look at commands that are not on the ribbon, all commands, macros, or you can go by whichever tab you think the command is on. In general, I'm never really sure which tab the option I'm looking for is on, so I generally go for all commands. And that will list absolutely every command that's available in Acces in alphabetical order. So once you have your list on the left-hand side, what you have on the right-hand side is essentially your Quick Access Toolbar. So you can see there the commands that I currently have on my QAT. Save, Undo, Redo, and Spelling, which was the last one that I added. So I'm going to go through this list and I'm going to add, let's go for an old favorite. I'm going to add bold, which is just there. So select it and click on the add button in the middle and it will add it to my list. Let's add another one whilst we're here. Let's go for relationships. So let's click on that one and add to the list. Now, once I've got these on my Quick Access Toolbar, I can rearrange the order as well. So if I don't particularly like that order, I can choose to move relationships using these up and down arrows on the right hand side. So I'm going to move relationships down to the end. I'm going to move bold down like so. Now another thing that's quite useful sometimes is if you want to kind of separate your icons on the Quick Access toolbar into groups. So much like on our ribbons, we have those vertical divider lines. You can do the same on the Quick Access toolbar by adding a separator. And separator will always be listed at the top of the list. And you can add as many of these as you like. So I'm going to click add, let's add a couple. And I can then choose where I want those separators to live. So I'm going to select the first one, I'm going to move it up, I'm going to add it in there, and then I'm going to take the second one and I'm going to add it like so. I'm going to click on OK. And it says you must close and reopen the current database for the specified option to take effect. Now, this is different to all the other Microsoft applications. In Excel or Word or PowerPoint, when you click on OK, it will just add those icons to your Quick Access toolbar. But Acces works slightly differently. I need to click on OK. I'm going to close my current database. I'm going to close this one again, and you can see that it's added those on. So let me just go in and reopen my contact list. And I can now see there is my Quick Access toolbar, and you can also see those separator lines that we've put in, which just makes it a little bit easier to see and group together different commands. Finally, there is another way that you can add commands onto your Quick Access toolbar, and that is simply by selecting them. So again, if I'm on the Home ribbon and maybe I decide that I want to add the Filter command to my Quick Access toolbar, I can right click and select Add to Quick Access toolbar, and you can now see there I have my filter. So very simple but very important to know how to customize that QAT. Now we've got our heads around that, we can move on to the next module, which is going to be all about contextual menus. So I'll see you over there. Hello again, this is Deb and welcome back to our course on Acces 2019. In this very short module, we're going to be talking about contextual menus. So apart from using the ribbon to access commands and controls, you can right-click and take a look at a contextual menu instead. And sometimes that's a little bit easier or a little bit more convenient than having to go up to the ribbons and look for the option that you need. So the idea behind contextual menus is that whatever you right-click on, it will bring you up a menu that's relevant or contains relevant commands to whatever it is that you're currently clicked on. So what do I mean by that? Well, let's go over to our navigation pane. You can currently see that I've got contact list highlighted under my forms because that's what I currently have open. Now if I was to right click my mouse on contact list, you can see I get a list of relevant options, and this is what we call a contextual menu. And we've been in here before when we've switched to design view. So you can see we have some other options in there. I can open this particular form. I can switch between different views. I can export it, rename it, hide it, delete, cut, copy, and also view the properties. So it's a lot easier for me to just quickly right click down here, then go up to the ribbon and look for the particular option that I need. So that is one form of a contextual menu. The same applies if I was working actually in this form. So if I was to click in a field such as email address and right click, you'll see I get a different contextual menu. It's showing me options which are now relevant to where I'm clicked. So in this case, I have cut, copy, paste. I can sort. So if I had information in here, I could sort it A to Z or Z to A. I can filter on some text, and I can do some other sorts as well, or searches. So just bear in mind that it really depends where you're clicked as to what contextual menu you will get, but it is always worth doing a right click and seeing if the option you need is to hand. And it really is as simple as that. As I said, this was a very, very short module, but one that was important for you to understand because it can greatly increase your efficiency and improve how you move around the application. In the next module, we're going to talk about how we can use the status bar, so please join me over there. Hello again and welcome back to our course on Acces 2019. In this module we're going to be taking a look at the status bar. Now the status bar might seem a fairly innocuous thing to spend quite a bit of time on, but it's actually really helpful. Now first of all, your status bar is this sort of blank looking bar which runs across the bottom of the workspace. So you can see over on the left hand side it says Datasheet View. And then we have a few other things down here, so num, lock, filtered, and then we have our different views. So let's look at that in a little bit more detail. Now currently I have the form contact list open. And if I look up at the Home tab, the first group that I have there is called Views, and you can see that it has a drop-down arrow. And this just enables me to switch between all the different views. So we're familiar with Design View, which we've been in before. We're currently in Form View, as that's highlighted in grey. And we also have a Layout View, which we could use as well. Now, those three buttons correspond to buttons that we have on the bottom right-hand end of the status bar. So again, if you cast your eyes all the way down to the bottom, you can see that currently I have Form View selected. And there I can switch to layout, and there I can switch to design view. So you have the options in two different places, on the status bar and also on your home ribbon. Now, if we right click on the status bar, again, we came into this a little bit earlier on, you have some options which will allow you to customize the type of information that's shown on your status bar, which can be very useful. So the ones that are currently ticked are the ones that are currently turned on, and you can go in and you can turn these off and on to your heart's content. So I could untick caps lock, for example. So that means that when I have caps lock on, so if I press caps lock on my keyboard, it's not going to tell me in the status bar that I have caps lock on. If I was to turn that back on, you can see that now it's telling me I have caps lock on. I'm going to press caps lock again on my keyboard just to turn that off. So it's really an informational area that you can customize. So let's look at this in a different way. Looking at this contacts list, let's suppose that I have hundreds of contacts and I only want to see the contacts with a specific job title. So I could go to the job title heading, I could go down to text filters, and I could say equals manager. And click on OK. So now that list is filtered on managers. Now I know I don't have anything in here, but it still has a filter applied to this column, and you can see the little filter up there. And what you'll also see is down in the status bar, it's telling me that it's filtered. And that's because when I right click, I have that filtered option turned on. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to clear that filter. And you can see that the word filtered has now disappeared from that bottom status bar. So it's really an informational area that can be pretty useful. And remember, that information will only appear when there is actually something to show. So now that I don't have this column filtered, it's not showing me that information. So it is worth going in and either ticking or unticking the information that you think you might be interested in seeing in your status bar, again, just to increase and improve your efficiency and the way that you're working with Acces. That's pretty much it. That's all I wanted to show you on the status bar. In the next module, we're going to be taking a look at keyboard shortcuts, so I will see you over there. Hello there and welcome back to our course on Acces 2019. In this module we're going to take a look at the use of keyboard shortcuts. Now keyboard shortcuts are a great way of moving efficiently and working efficiently within Acces, and some people actually prefer to use keyboard shortcuts as opposed to a mouse. Now that might be just down to personal preference, or it might be that they have some kind of physical or physiological reason why they need to use a keyboard as opposed to a mouse. Now, I would say that if you don't use the keyboard much and you're perfectly happy with working with the mouse, then you can skip this section. But I would say that I use keyboard shortcuts a lot, but I don't tend to use them when I'm recording a video such as this one for demonstration. mainly for the reason that if I'm using keyboard shortcuts when I'm working in Acces, you can't actually see when I'm using them. So I prefer to use the mouse because it's easier for you to see what I'm doing that way. However, in my daily working life, I do use quite a number of shortcuts, not only in Acces, but across all of the Microsoft applications. And I would say that most people probably have in general maybe 7 to 10 that they use all the time. So things like cut, copy and paste, so Control X, Control C, Control V, and also maybe save, Control S, print, Control P. People generally have their favorite shortcuts that they utilize all the time. And I will say there are so many shortcuts in Acces that you're never going to remember all of them off the top of your head. However, there is a way to find out the keyboard shortcut for your commands. So for example, if I hover over on the home ribbon, the copy button, you'll see there it's telling me that Control C is the keyboard shortcut for that particular command. If I hover over spelling, you can see that F7 is the shortcut key for that. So some of these commands do have that useful screen tip which will allow you to see what the keyboard shortcut is. However, if you hover over some other commands, so let's hover over totals, you'll see the screen tip literally just says totals. It doesn't show me the keyboard shortcut. So it's worth remembering that not every command has a keyboard shortcut. However, if you do want to see a definitive list, you can find a list of all of the shortcuts available within Help. So I'm going to press F1 to pull up my Help, and I could in Help search for keyboard shortcuts. And you can see here the first link there is keyboard shortcuts for Acces, and I can then pull it up and it goes through the whole list in a table. So that might be something which you want to print out, have near you so that you have access to all of those as and when you need them. I'm just going to close that down. And also remember, as we discussed before, if you press the Alt key, that's going to pull up the shortcuts that you can use to jump between your ribbons. And when you jump across to a new ribbon, you can then select whichever command it is that you need, again using entirely your keyboard. So don't forget that you have the Alt option there as well. That's about it on keyboard shortcuts. In the next module, we're going to discuss key tips, so I'll see you over there. Hello again and welcome back to our course on Acces 2019. In this module, I just want to briefly go into a little bit more detail about those key tips. Now, in the previous module, we talked a lot about keyboard shortcuts, and I referred you to the definitive list of shortcuts in the Help section. And one keyboard shortcut that I pointed out was F7 for spelling. So if we remember, on the home ribbon, we have spelling, and if I hover over it, you can see the shortcut key is F7. So if I now press F7 on my keyboard, I have no data in here, so obviously it's gone through and it's told me that the spelling check is complete, but at least I know that that F7 key is actually working and is actually doing that spell check. I also highlighted to you that some commands, such as totals up here, don't have a keyboard shortcut assigned to them. And many commands in Acces 2019 don't have a shortcut. So that alternative facility then becomes really important, and that is what we call key tips. So again, if we press the Alt key, it lets us access all of our tabs, our ribbons, and the associated commands on those tabs using our keyboard. So if this time, if I press X, that should jump me to the External Data tab, which it does. And now I have a whole new set of key tips to choose from. So if I wanted to look at how to export to Excel, I could press X again, and that will take me into my Export to Excel wizard. So far I haven't had to touch my mouse at all, which can be very useful for people who have disabilities, for people who have some kind of physiological problem, or even if you just prefer to navigate and find it more efficient using your keyboard. I know a lot of people who really do prefer to keep their hands on the keyboard the entire time as opposed to constantly using the mouse. So this is a great option for all of those groups of people. Now, it is worth pointing out that when you get to the command or setting or control, it doesn't necessarily mean that you can do everything using the keyboard, but you can get pretty much most of the way. So if I was on this screen here, now you might think that I would have to use my mouse, but if I press the Tab key, can you see that Browse is now highlighted? I could then press Enter to select Browse, and then maybe I can use my arrow keys to select a file. If I press Tab again, it moves me to the next field, and I can press my down arrow and I can select my option by pressing Enter. And I can carry on pressing Tab and it will take me through all my different options. So now I'm on OK and I can hit Enter if I wanted to. So I can pretty much go most of the way using my keyboard, but just be aware that maybe some occasions where you will have to use your mouse, but using a combination of down and up arrows, Enter key, Tab, you can pretty much tab your way through and select most things. Now I'm just going to cancel out of there. And again, it's worth remembering, if you are in Alt mode, where you have your keyboard shortcuts up here, or your key tips, I should say, press Alt again to come out. Alternatively, you can press the Escape key, and that will also get rid of those key tips. So that's it. I just wanted to give you a little bit more detail on those key tips because it is important for a number of different groups of people. In the next module, we're going to be taking a look at databases and language options. So please join me for that. Hello again and welcome back to our course on Acces 2019. In this module, we're going to take a look at the Acces options, and many aspects of Acces options will allow you to essentially customize the way that you use Acces. And what I want to do really is just highlight to you some of the ones that I think are useful and also some of the ones that are pretty important to you as well. And I would always say before you kind of start using Acces, or even as you're using it, that you go into options and you really review how you have everything set to make sure it's set in the way that's best for you and how you like to work. And options are something that we'll revisit quite a lot throughout the entirety of this course. So let's jump into our options. We're going to jump up to our File tab, and right at the bottom we have Options. And this should look reasonably familiar to you. We have been in here before when we've been looking at how we can customize the Quick Access toolbar and also how we can customize the ribbon as well. Now we're going to start up here on the General tab. Now this isn't the most important tab out of all of them, but it is worth taking a look in here, and I'll just highlight a few things which I think are particularly useful. So the first thing here is that I have Enable Live Preview ticked. So let me show you what that live preview actually means. I'm going to cancel out of this screen, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my contact list form. I'm going to go up to my Form Layout Tools contextual ribbon and jump into the Design tab. And I'm going to head over to Themes. Now what you'll see here is I get a list of different color themes that I can apply to my form, and themes really control the styling of your form essentially. So that might be fonts, colors, styles, things like that. Now because I have Live Preview enabled, you'll see that when I hover over any of these in this list, you can actually see it changing on my form. And that is what we call a live preview. And I actually really like this feature because sometimes maybe I'm not sure which one I want to use. So it allows me to kind of go through all of my options before I actually select one. So with that in mind, let's jump back to File and down to Options again. And this time I'm going to turn off that live preview and click on OK. And now you'll see that when I go into Themes and I hover over, it doesn't change at all. So that setting really is a personal preference. As I said, I actually really like to have this feature turned on. And of course, Live Preview doesn't just apply to themes, it will apply to things like fonts, table styles, all of those kinds of things as well. So you can turn that off or on, whichever suits you best. Now another thing is this screen tip style, and you can see that I have mine set to show feature descriptions in screen tips. So again, let's just remind ourselves what we mean by a screen tip. I'm going to cancel out of here. I'm going to hover over, let's do themes again to keep it consistent. And you can see when I hover over that command, I get a little pop-up box or a screen tip with the title which says themes, and then I get a description of what that command is actually going to do. So that is the screen tip. Now again, I find these quite useful because sometimes if you're not sure what something does, that can be quite a helpful description. But I do know that some people find them a little bit annoying, a little bit distracting, and sometimes they can kind of cover up what you're trying to work on below. So a lot of people do like to turn these off. So again, that is personal preference, but that is basically what we have in this options area here. I can choose to show feature descriptions in screen tips, don't show feature descriptions, so that would just give me the title of themes, or I can choose to turn them off entirely. So again, that's another feature that you can customize to your liking. And in this case, I'm going to keep all of mine as they were. I'm going to enable that live preview once again. So let's move down now to this creating databases section, and you want to make sure that you have the default file format for new blank databases set correctly. And you have numerous options in this drop down, so it really does depend which version you are using. Now you may have noticed that mine's set to Acces 2007 to 2016, and this is a 2019 course. It doesn't appear that Microsoft have added that into this drop down for some reason. But I would say that the version I'm using, so 2019, is pretty much exactly the same as Acces 2016. So I have mine set to that latest version. So just make sure you go in there and check it's set correctly for your version. Underneath that, I then have a default database folder, and you can see that this is set to my local drives to my documents folder, and this is where all of your new databases will be created by default. Now obviously you can change that by clicking on the browse. If you have a specific location where you want to save your databases, please do feel free to go in there and change that as well. And then underneath that, we have this new database sort order. So by default, a new database is assigned a sort order, and I have mine set to General Legacy. And your default really needs to be set according to language. So my default is set to English. If you're using a different language, you may need to use a different sort order. So this is related to how things get sorted in your tables and in your databases. So you want to make sure that that is actually relevant to the language that you're using. So again, if you're using something other than English, then you might want to come in here and select your language from the list. And then finally at the bottom, we have a section to personalize your copy of Microsoft Office. And you can see there it has my username and my initials. So this means that this is a copy of Microsoft Office that's registered to me. And if I was doing anything such as comments and things like that, it would come up with my name and it would take that information from this section of options. I can also choose to set an Office background if I wanted to, so lots of different options in there for me. And also, again, as we saw previously, you can set an Office theme. So that is really down to personal taste and is really just about the look and feel of your copy of Office. Now, there's really only a couple of other things I want to look at in this options page at the moment. So let's jump across to the second option down in this list, Current Database. So these are my settings for the current database, and you can see the application title at the top there. And this basically determines what is shown at the top of the workspace. So you can see at the moment it says Contact Management Database. Now if I scroll down to the navigation section, I also have the option to switch off the navigation pane as well. Now you might be thinking, why on earth would I want to disable the navigation pane? Well, if you're sharing this database with someone else, if they come to use the database that you've created, you may want to switch off the navigation pane to restrict access. So to things like deleting data or going into design mode, things like that. So it could be used as a kind of way to control the integrity of the database that you've created. So don't forget you have that option in there as well. I'm now going to jump down to the language area. And all you need to do in here is make sure that you have the correct language set. So I use two languages when I'm creating courses. I use English United States, which is my current default, and I also use English United Kingdom as well. And you can see both of my languages are listed there. Now I could add more languages if I wanted to. So if I click the drop down, I have a choice of many different languages. So I can just come in here, select whichever one I want to add, and then click that add button just there. And if I want to make a different language a default language, for example, if I wanted to switch my default to English United Kingdom, I can just select it and click on the Set as Default button at the side. Now, we've already looked at the Customize ribbon option and also the Customize Quick Access toolbar. Add-ins we're not going to look at in this course, and Trust Center is something that we're going to look at in a little bit more detail a bit later on. But for now, those are the only things I really wanted to point out in your Access options. We're now going to start making some databases in the next section, so please join me for that. Hello there and welcome back to my course on Access 2019. In this module, we're going to take a look at how we can create a table and field. So essentially how we can create our first working database. Now, the main example will be the tour database, and we created a starting point a little while ago, and now we're going to add some content. Now, before we begin, there is one thing that I want to do just to make this look a little bit less messy, and that is deal with that big long title that we have running across the top of the screen. It doesn't look particularly tidy, and we have a lot of superfluous information in there, which we don't really need to see at this stage. So I'm going to change that title, and if you remember back to the last module when we were looking at Access options, there was an area in there where we can go and make an amendment to this big long title. So let's jump back into our options by clicking on File and going down to Options. And I'm going to give this a more appropriate title. So in this application title box, I'm going to type in Esprit de Tour Trips of a Lifetime and click on OK. And there we go, that instantly looks a lot tidier. Now, the core of any database that you create is the data. And the data in modern databases is held in tables. And for this tour database, we're going to have a number of different tables. And the first table will contain the details of our core trips. And when I say trip, what I mean is a trip is one entity, and during the course of the year, we may run the trip several times, and each instance of a trip we're going to call a tour. So for example, a trip that we run all year round might run 15 or 20 times throughout the year. So that one trip will have many tours. And what I've done is I've put together an example for you of the information that we might want to keep about each trip. So I've put together an example of the information that we might want to keep about each trip. And you can see it there in this notepad file that I have on the screen. So each trip will have a code, GCA, and GCA is basically an abbreviation of the name of the trip. So in this case, Grand Canyon Family Rafting Adventure. And there are several types of trip: family, escorted, group, activity, and landscapes. The activity level for the trip is moderate, and the country this trip operates in is the USA. We then have a description of the trip, so just a couple of lines just there. And of course, later on, we might add more detail into this, such as a more detailed itinerary. But at the moment, we've just got a very brief description. The duration of this trip is 8 days, and the price range, excluding flights, is $3,080 to $3,112. So with this pricing, individual tours, so instances of the trip, the prices will vary depending on when the trip is and how much demand there is. So all of this info is going to be stored for this particular trip. Now, one particular part of the trip, the type, I'm not going to store in the trip table at the moment, and the reason for that will become apparent a bit later on. So I'm going to skip type and I'm going to set up everything else. Now, one or two things I want to highlight just here. What I'm going to do in a moment is I'm going to make a deliberate error and I'm going to correct it later on. So sometimes one of the best ways to do these things will happen later when you become more familiar with Acces. So let me give you an example of that. Look at the trip definition. So it says country USA. And you might say to yourself, well, surely some of the trips will go to more than one country. Shouldn't we have a list of countries that are visited on the trip? And the answer to that is yes, you should, but we're going to deal with that later on. So the main point I'm trying to get across here is that it's a good idea to try and get things as right as you can early on, but be aware that you may need to make changes as we go through creating this database. And sometimes changing things in database design can be quite hard. So some things are easy to change and some not quite so easy. You would have to go through and do what I would call a little bit of faffing around in order to get it how you want it. So just be aware of that as we move through. So just try and get everything as right as you can from the outset. So with all that in mind, let's create our first table. And this is the table that will hold the trip information. I'm going to go up to the Create tab and I'm going to click on the Table button. And you can see that this has been given a default name of Table 1. We can see that just lurking there on that tab. And Table 1 opens in Datasheet View. And again, remember that you can check your views right down in the bottom right-hand corner. You can see that the one highlighted in grey is the one currently in use. So I can confirm there that I am in fact using Datasheet View. Now the other button we have in the bottom right-hand corner is Design View. And we did look at this earlier. So let me click on Design View. Now, one thing that happens quite a lot when you're working on a table is that whenever you do something in terms of design or even creating the table, you'll be asked if you want to save. So I am actually going to go in and I'm going to save this table. Now, this is the trip table, so you might be tempted just to call it something like trip. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to follow a convention whereby the objects have a prefix which identifies the object. So in case of tables, the prefix is TBL. So I'm going to call this TBL trip, which identifies that as a table to me. Now, this might seem a little strange, but I might later on have maybe a form where I maintain trip info. But that would have a prefix of FRM trip. So I would know the difference between the table and the form. So now I'm in Design View for the trip table. And in Design View, I can see the fields that make up the table. So by default, I have a single field. It has a field name of ID. It has a data type of auto number. And I can put a description in. Now the description I'm going to put in here is unique trip ID. And this is not the same as the trip code. The unique trip ID is a unique identifier and it's a very important part of the table. The importance of that unique ID is best explained in an example. So let's suppose I set up this Grand Canyon trip and it runs for a few years, and then we decide to drop it. If then later we create a different trip with the code GCA, we would need to identify it, and we do that using the unique ID. And very often unique IDs are not visible to the people that are using your table or your form or your database. They are more used in the back end. And unique IDs can be searched on for trips, things like that. So these numbers will always be unique and they're very important when you're setting up any kind of trip. Now, before we add fields to the table, let's close this property sheet on the right just by clicking on the X, which gives us a little bit more room. Now let's add a second field. Now our second field, if we refer back to our notepad, is going to be this first line in our trip information, so trip code. So let's add in a second field. So this is where I'm going to list that trip code. So I'm going to say code as the field name. Now the default data type is short text. And you'll see that there are many different data types that we can work with. And we're going to go through some of these as we move through the course. Now in description, I'm just going to type in 3-character trip code. And with this row selected, you can see the properties of that field in the lower half of the screen. So in the lower half, we have this section here called field properties. And if you look at that first section there where it says field size, we have the number there of 255. And what that means is that we can have a maximum of 255 characters input into this. Now, I doubt very much that I would ever have a trip code that's 255 characters long. So we can change this. And I know that all of my trip codes are going to be a maximum of 3 characters long, so like GCA. So I'm going to change that to 3, which will kind of restrict the amount of characters to 3 characters only that you can enter into that specific field. Now, a lot of these other properties we're going to come back to, but there are a couple that I would like to point out. So just here where it says required, and it's currently set to no. So what this is saying currently is that in order to store a trip, this table doesn't need a code. Now, that's not correct. I want to make sure that in order to store this trip, every trip has a code. So I'm going to click the drop down at the end and change that to yes, a code is required to store this information. Then underneath that, we have allow 0 length. So again, this is set to yes. So what that essentially means is that the code can be 0 characters in length. Now, again, that's not what I want. So I'm going to select the drop down and select no. And finally, we have index. Now, is this field going to be indexed yes or no? And I'm going to explain a little bit more about indexing at the start of the next module. For now, the answer is yes, but the trip code cannot be duplicated. So let's just change that to yes, no duplicates. So now I basically have the definition of the second field in my trip table. We're going to be going into this in more detail in the next module, so please join me for that. Hello again, this is Deb and welcome back to our course on Acces 2019. In the preceding section, we started work on creating our trip table for the Esprit de Tour travel company. And I have a few things that I want to point out before we move on, and that's related to indexing and keys. So as the content of the database grows, as the people are using the database, it can take longer to find what you need in a database. So really here, what I'm referring to is searching. So if you think about it, if you're going to book a trip, so maybe you're on a website and you want to book a trip, think about the things that you generally tend to search for when you're looking for a trip on a website. It might be that you search by a particular place name or trip type, or maybe you search by activity level. So if you want a particularly active holiday, you might search for trips that are active, or you might be more interested in the price of the holiday. So this is where indexing comes in, and indexing really improves performance when searching. So the last field we added was a code field. If someone wants to find this information about the trip and the code is not indexed, Acces has to read through all of the trips in the trip table to find that specific code. However, if you do index the field, it means that Acces can essentially go straight to the trip with this code. So it's a lot quicker and it definitely improves performance as Acces isn't having to churn through loads and loads of trip codes searching. It can go directly there if you've indexed the field. Now there's always a downside to these things sometimes, and the downside here is that in order to maintain these indexes, as data gets modified or changed, this process tends to slow down the maintenance process, as in maintaining the data. And you'll see down in the bottom right hand corner, it shows a pop-up about indexes. So it says an index speeds up searches and sorting on the field, but may slow updates. Selecting yes/no duplicates prohibits duplicate values in the field. Press F1 for help on indexed fields. So if you do want to read a little bit more, definitely jump into that help file and have a little bit more of a read on indexing. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, how do I decide if a field that I add needs to be indexed? And there are some technical considerations, but there are also business considerations. So for example, we've indexed the code, and that's because it's a very important identifier. So that would be the sort of thing that you would want to index. An example of something you probably wouldn't want to index would be the description. So not many people would jump onto a website and search for a trip by its description. They're more likely to use maybe the code or the trip name or the price or something along those lines. So really think about that, and it will determine whether you need to index that field or not. Now, the other thing to point out here is in the ID field. So I'm going to click on the ID field. And I don't know if you can see in this first column here, there's a little key symbol. And if you glance up at the Table Tools Design ribbon, you can see that we have primary key highlighted in grey. So what that means is whatever the ID is, it's the main unique way that we identify a record in this table. Now let's move on a little bit and talk a little bit more about these views. So we're currently in Design View. And you can see that we have a contextual tab up here, so Table Tools and Design, and that contains all of our commands. And some of these controls we're going to look at later on, but one of them that I want to draw your attention to is this property sheet. So if I click that, you can see I get that pane appear on the right-hand side. I want you to note also that to the left of this button, we have some commands for inserting rows and also deleting rows. And I showed you earlier how you can switch to datasheet view. There's always a couple of ways to do these things. So if I jump across to this views drop down, I'm going to switch to datasheet view. And remember we spoke earlier that whenever you make any changes, it's going to ask you to save. So I'm going to click yes to save. And I've now switched to datasheet view. So now that I'm in a different view, if I glance up at my ribbons again, you'll see that I have different contextual tabs now. So I still have Table Tools, but this time I have a Fields tab and a Table tab. Now the reason that I get different tabs when I'm in Datasheet View is that in general, Datasheet View is what you would go into to make changes, to add fields, things like that. Whereas in Design View, we're really controlling the overall design of our table. So different things, you'll get different tabs. So you can see here in Datasheet View, we now have those two fields. So we have ID and code, which is the one that we just set up. Now, if I wanted to add a third field, I could go across to where it says click to add. I can right click and I can select my data type. So I'm going to say short text, and I'm going to call this field trip name. So essentially, I've now defined another field. Let's switch back to Design View now. So I'm going to use my button in the bottom right-hand corner. And you can see now there is my trip name. So I'm going to want to define some properties for my field. So I'm going to click on it. I can see my data type is short text, which I'm fine with. And if I look down in my field properties, again, field size, 255 characters. Now that should be plenty for a trip, so I'm just going to leave that. Do we require a name? Well, yes, we do. Every trip must have a name, so I'm going to change that to yes. Do we allow a zero length name? Well, that's going to be no. And do we want to index this particular field? Now, in this case, I'm going to say no, because in general, you wouldn't index text fields. Normally, if you want to find a trip with a particular name, you would expect Acces to go through the trips and find that particular one. So we're going to say no to indexed. So those are the basic settings for trip name. What I'm going to do now is put in a description. And that's my field set up. Let's jump back to Datasheet View. And of course, I'm going to save my changes by clicking Yes. And now we have 3 fields in the trip table. So hopefully by now you can see a pattern of setting up fields in the table. Now, one thing that we haven't done is add any data. And I'm going to add a dummy trip now to show you some of the things you need to be aware of. So each row is essentially a record in our table. So in our case, a trip. And we have a row here with a star and it says new. So that indicates that if I start typing in this particular row, I'm going to be creating a new trip. So let's set up a code for a new trip. So my code for this one is going to be LEX. So this trip is going to be called Louisiana. Explorer. And if you don't have enough room, you can drag this column in and out to make it wider or narrower. Now also note that I have a little pen icon in the farthest most left column. And that just indicates that this record is the one that I'm currently working on. Now, this doesn't have all of the information that we need, but it's a very good start. So now we have 3 fields defined and I've added a row of data. In the next section, we're going to be adding more fields, so please join me for that. Hello again and welcome back to our course on Acces 2019. In this module, we're going to continue setting up the trip table and particularly focusing on the next field, which is activity level. So the key difference between activity level and the fields so far is that activity level is going to offer up a number of options. So again, if we refer back to our notepad file, we can see here activity level for this particular trip is moderate. But we might have numerous different activity levels. So we might have moderate, active, leisurely, anything along those lines. So we're going to need to set up something which will allow us to select multiple options. So in this case, we're going to set up 3 different options, but you could have 20, 50, 100, as many as you like. So let's first give our field a name. So I'm going to call this activity level. I'm going to tab to get across to data type. Now this time from the drop down, I'm going to go all the way down to the bottom and select the Lookup Wizard option. And this is going to jump you to a wizard. And again, if you've used Microsoft products before, you may be familiar with this wizard. In general, wizards guide you through a process. They can be really helpful if you're not entirely sure what it is that you want to do, because they can just help you. You just select different options and then the task is done for you. So I really like wizards. And the reason why I'm using the Lookup Wizard is because for activity level, what I essentially want people to be able to do is to pick an activity level from a list. So whether it's active, moderate, leisurely, so on and so forth. And we're going to create that list using this Lookup Wizard. So let's just read what we have on the screen. It says this wizard creates a lookup field which displays a list of values you can choose from. How do you want your lookup field to get its values? And you can see the first option there is selected by default. So it says I want the lookup field to get the values from another table or query. Now you could use that option, but in this case I want to actually define the lookup values myself. So I'm going to say the second option, I will type in the values that I want. And I'm going to click Next. Now when it comes to setting up the options that a user can select, we could get pretty complex and have lots of different columns. But in this case, we're going to keep it fairly simple and we're just going to have one column. And remember, the options we are adding are for activity level. So I'm going to click in column 1 and I'm going to type in leisurely, moderate, and challenging. So essentially each trip is classified using one of the 3 options. And I'm going to click Next. So now it's asking me what label would you like for your lookup field? And you can see it's picked up there essentially my field name, which is activity level. Now, when it comes to naming fields, I like to name them without spaces and keep them fairly simple. And you might have your own naming convention. Now, it's not that you can't put spaces in between your words, so activity space level in this case, but that can cause some problems later on. So just to kind of get around all of that, I either have it all as one word, or I might separate the two words using something like an underscore. I have a little checkbox underneath that says limit to list. So do I want to limit the choices to the list that I've created? So yes, I do. So I'm going to select limit to list. I don't want someone to be able to go in there and add in more activity levels. The next option, do you want to store multiple values for this lookup? Now this is a little bit controversial in Acces. So if you have a list, what this means is if you allow multiple values, it will allow the user to select more than one activity level. Now in this case, that might seem a little bit odd. You probably wouldn't have a trip that's challenging and leisurely, so you'd probably just select one in that case. Now this might be valid in some circumstances to select more than one option. So for example, if you had a big long list of countries and this trip applied to multiple different countries, then you might use something like a multi-select. But in this case, I'm not going to allow multiple values because they aren't needed. So I'm just going to click Finish. I'm going to add a description for my field. So we're going to say indicator of how active this trip is. And let me go down and select set my field properties for this particular field. So field size, now this is only holding one word, so it's going to be leisurely, moderate or challenging. So I'm just going to change this to 30 characters. That should cover it. Is the activity level required? Yes, it is. Is it indexed? So do we want to be able to search on the activity level? So I'm going to say yes for this because it might be that you want to go in and do a search for all holidays that are moderate. So I'm going to say yes, and I'm going to say duplicates okay because there might be multiple trips where moderate has been assigned as the activity level. Now, because this uses a lookup, I'm going to go to the Lookup tab in my field properties. It's just next to General just here. And this is where I can set my properties for that little drop down or that lookup. So you can see the first field here, it says display control and it says combo box. And again, if you've used the combo boxes in Excel, then you might be fairly familiar with what these are. So it basically just means like a little drop down box where you can select an option. And again, I'm going to explain more about the different styles of drop down that you can have, but for the moment, I'm happy to keep this on combo box. We then have row source type. So do you want to get the values from a table, query, or type them in? So we chose to type them in, which is value list. So I'm going to keep that just there. Then underneath that, we have our row source, and you can see there we have the three different activity levels: leisurely, moderate, and challenging. And you can probably see very simply how you could modify those. If I decided that I wanted to remove leisurely, I could just come into here, highlight it and delete it. Or if I wanted to add another one, I could very simply just come onto the end here. I could type in a semicolon and then type in my new activity level in quote marks. So you can modify your raw source from your field properties. So I'm actually going to do that. I'm going to jump into here and I'm going to add in another field that says leisurely to moderate. I'm just putting that in quote marks and making sure I have those semicolons in between. So super simple to modify those. Do I want to limit to list? Yes, I do. I only want people to be able to select the data that I've specified or the activity levels I've specified, so that's fine. Do I want to allow multiple values? No, I don't. You can only select one. And do I allow value list edits? I'm going to say no, as I don't want anyone else other than me changing those values. So that's the settings for the activity level field. Now I need to set an appropriate value for our Louisiana Explorer trip. So I'm going to jump to Datasheet View. Now, this is a warning message that you'll see pop up from time to time, and it's basically Acces doing a check of its data integrity rules. And you can see here it says, data integrity rules have been changed. Existing data may not be valid for the new rules. It says this process may take a long time. Do you want the existing data to be tested with the new rules? Now, we're still very early on in the process of setting this database up, and whilst later on it's probably going to be good for me to get Acces to do a data integrity check to make sure everything is okay, at the moment I'm not too worried about that. So I'm going to click on cancel and we can run the testing later. So now we are back at our Tubble trip. We can see we have the Louisiana Explorer trip in here, and we now have a new field for activity level. When I click in this field, you can see that now I have a little drop down arrow. And would you look at that? There we have leisurely, moderate, and challenging. And for this one, I'm going to select leisurely to moderate. And again, you can widen that column out if you need to. So the next field to add in is the country field. And ultimately, we need to be able to specify that a trip goes to a number of different countries. But at this stage, I'm just going to record the main country that the trip visits. So in this case, it would be USA. I'm going to use a lookup again, but I'm going to say that selection is not limited to the list because I'm not really sure about my country list yet. The list might change. So I'm going to go away and I'm going to set up this country field, and I'll join you in a few moments. So country is now set up. I'm going to jump back to Datasheet view, and I'm going to record the country for my Louisiana Explorer, which is USA. And we have one final field to add, and that is the description. Now, description won't be a short text field. It might be longer than 255 characters. So I'm going to change this data type to long text. And a long text field can hold up to a gig of text. Now, it's a little bit difficult as a user of Acces to really be able to know what that means. What is a gig of text? And what I will say is that each field can hold roughly 64,000 characters. And I very much doubt we're going to have a description that's that long. So I'm now going to set the properties for this field, and the only one to really point out here is that in general a long text description wouldn't be indexed, so I'm going to have no just there. Let's add a quick description, and then let's jump back to Datasheet view, and we're going to add a description in here for our Louisiana Explorer trip. So that's it. We have a few more fields to add, and they are all numeric, and we're going to cover those in the next module. So please join me for that. Hello there, and welcome back to our course on Acces 2019. So far, we've been setting up the fields in the trip table of the Esprit de Tour database. And we're now going to add all of the remaining ones, which are all numeric. So the first one that we're going to add is the duration of the trip in days. So again, let's refer back to our notepad file. And you can see the duration here is 8 days. So I'm going to add in a field name, and I'm going to say duration days. And this time the data type is going to be number because it's a numeric field. Now, if we glance down to the properties for the field, you can see here it says field size long integer, and we have a whole host of different options. Now, depending on how much you know about the way numbers are stored, you may or may not be able to choose a number field size. So you might not know if it's integer or byte or single or double. You might not have any idea what those are. And it is a little bit confusing in that way, but there is help on this in Acces Help. So let's jump into Help by pressing our F1 key. Now, because I was clicked in that property field, it's actually jumped me to the correct page within Help that I need. If we scroll down, you can see a description here of those different options. So you can see here, if we were to choose byte, that would store numbers from 0 to 255. So if we use byte to store the duration of the trip, the longest number of days for our trip could be 255 days, which is roughly 8 or 9 months. Now that's pretty good, but it might be that as this grows, we might have trips that are longer than that. So it's probably going to be better for us to go to the next one up, which is integer. So you can see here, integer stores numbers from minus 32,768 to plus 32,767, which is a pretty long trip. So to be on the safe side, I'm probably going to select integer for my trip. Now, while we're here, I would definitely say it's worth looking through and reading through the rest of these different field types, just so you become familiar with them as you set up your database. So I'm going to close this down, and in my field size property, I'm going to select integer. Now, so far, we've been ignoring some of these other properties. I want to make sure that when people are storing the duration of the trip, they are storing a positive duration. So we don't want a trip that has minus days. We always want it to be on the positive side. So in this property where we have validation rule, I'm going to say it always must be greater than 0 days. And I'm going to add some validation text to that. So we're going to put in duration must be greater than 0. Is the duration required? Yes, it is. Every trip must have a duration. Do we want it to be indexed? Yes, we do, because people will often search on the length of a trip before they select it. And I'm going to say yes, duplicate's okay, because we could have multiple trips with the same duration. And I'm going to add a description, which is going to say duration of trip in days. So let's now test this out and test some of those rules and properties that we've set up. I'm going to jump back to Datasheet View. I'm going to save, of course. I'm going to say no to testing at this moment in time. And I'm going to go to duration. Now I'm going to just first enter in a minus number. So I'm going to say -3 days. And there we go. I get a little pop-up that says duration must be greater than 0. So I can see that those validation checks that I've done there are working correctly. Let's change this now to +8 days. And that allows me to enter that with no issue. Now the final thing we need to do with regards to numeric values is price range. So again, let's look at our notepad file. You can see the price range here, excluding flights, is $3,080 to $3,112. And essentially, if you have a price range, it should be stored as 2 separate values, so a minimum price and a maximum price. And the reason why we have a price range in general terms is that when someone books a specific tour, so one instance of the trip, there will be a set of specific prices for that tour. So we might have things like special offers for families, things like that. So what we're going to do is we're going to store a minimum price and a maximum price. So let's jump back to Design View. I'm going to say price minimum. And the data type here is going to be currency. Now the currency will be selected based on whatever you have it set up as. So my default is US dollars, which is what my currency is going to be in. I'm going to add a description. So minimum price of trip. I'm going to set some properties. So I'm going to say my validation rule, the price must be greater than 0. And my validation text is minimum price must be positive. Is this a required field? Yes, it is. Every trip must have a price. And is it going to be indexed? Yes, because I would say that this is probably one of the main things that people search on, and that is the price of a trip. And I'm going to do exactly the same for price maximum. We're going to select currency. maximum price of trip, validation, it must be greater than 0. Okay, so let's now jump back to datasheet view. We're going to save. I'm going to say no to testing. And what you can see here immediately is that for these two new fields, the price minimum and price maximum, Acces has automatically put in my currency in the correct format for me, which is really good. I don't have to go in and change anything. So I'm going to grab my minimum price. I'm just going to do a quick copy and paste. So minimum, and let's do the maximum. So that's it. I've now finished the definition of the trip table, and we will need to load some more data later on. But that's it on the trip table for now. It's now time for you to do exercise 1. So I will see you over there. Hello again and welcome back to our course on Acces 2019. In this module, we're going to start talking about importing data from Excel. And really what I want to do is just introduce to you some basic ways of importing data into a database. Now, before we start, so far, when we talk about a database, we mean a single file. And within that file, there are many different things. For example, there could be a number of different tables. And we've already seen how to create some tables. And you could have a lot of different tables within your database. Now, it's not always the case that these tables will hold the data. It might be that you need to import data from a different source, so the data might be essentially external. So we mentioned earlier on that when it comes to people booking vacations, they probably book and then pay using their local currency. So it might be that there is a table somewhere where we look up the currency conversion rates. Now, that might not be a table that we maintain in our own database. It could be on an external website or in an external service or in a different Acces database somewhere else. And we really just want to import that data in. Now, when we do access data from another source, the term within Acces is called linking. And you can link together tables in other databases. Now, we're not going to be covering linking too much in this course, but we are going to take a look at importing data, and we're going to import data from two different sources, which would be the most common sources, importing from an Excel spreadsheet and also importing data from a text file. So how do we do that? Well, let's go up to our external data ribbon. And you'll see here the first group we have is import and link. I'm going to click the new data source, and I can choose to import from numerous different sources. So if I hover over from file, you can see I can import from an Excel file, an HTML document, XML file, text file. I can import from another Acces database if I wanted to, or from an SQL server, Azure database, DBase file, or I could choose to import from different online services. So maybe you have a SharePoint list or maybe some other kind of data service. And then we have from other sources, which will allow you to import from something like an ODBC database, which is basically a database that's compatible with Acces. So lots of different ways that you can import data into Acces. Now let me just show you the data that I want to import first of all. So this is the Esprit de Tour Trip Import worksheet, and you'll find this in the course files folder, so you can open that up and take a look at it for yourself. And you can see here what we have are the field names essentially are our column headings in Excel. So we have code, trip name, activity level, country, description, duration days, price minimum, and price maximum. And each row is a different trip. So we have the Grand Canyon Family Rafting Adventure, Iconic Italy, Special Family Safari, so on and so forth. And if I scroll down, you'll see that we have not too many, a dozen or so trips within this file. And what I want to do is I want to import all of these into my Tubble trip table in Acces. So I'm going to close down my Excel spreadsheet. I'm going to go up to New Data Source and I'm going to select From File and Excel. The first thing we need to do, you can see here we've got this little wizard pop up again, which will guide us through this process. Acces is asking me to specify the source of my file essentially. I have a default file name in there, so you just want to browse to wherever you have your Excel spreadsheet saved. I then need to specify how and where I want to store the data in the current database, and I have three options. I can choose to import the data from that Excel spreadsheet into a new table in the current database. So if I was to choose this option, it will basically import it and create a brand new table. My second option is to append a copy of the records to a table that I specify, which in this case might be Tubble Trip. So in this case, what it will do is it will import the data from Excel and it will append it to this current table. And that is actually what I want to do. If you remember in Tubble Trip, we currently have one trip listed, that's the Louisiana Explorer, and I just want to add all of these trips in my Excel spreadsheet to my current Tubble Trip table. The third option I have is to link to the data source by creating a linked table. As I said, we're not going to cover linking too much, but essentially if you were to select this option, it doesn't import the data into Acces, but it will create a link to it in Excel. So there may be some occasions where you want to use that option. Now I'm happy with the second option. I'm going to click on OK. And you can see here the import wizard has analyzed my data in Excel. And because it's in Excel, it's made it pretty easy for Acces to slice up that data according to the various different columns or field names. So I have code, trip name, activity level. And if I scroll across, just to make sure, there's the description, might be quite long. I'm going to go to the end. Duration days, price minimum, price maximum. So that all looks pretty good to me. So I'm fairly confident that if I was to click finish on this wizard, it's going to import all of that data into Tubble Trip. So really simple to import data from Excel. Now I'm going to click cancel here because I want to actually show you this using a different method. So using the same data, but it's going to be stored in a text file as opposed to an Excel file. So I'm going to click cancel just here. So before we do this, let's just look at the text file. So here we have the Esprit de Tour trip import.txt file. And again, you'll find this file located in the course files folder. And this is exactly the same as the Excel file that we just saw, but it's a little bit harder to read. As you can see, we don't have the nice Excel grid structure dividing up these different fields. I can see fairly clearly that we have the code listed in this first column. We then have trip name, activity level, and everything starts to get a little bit bunched up, making it quite difficult to read. However, there is a pattern to this, and the pattern is that each of my fields is separated with a tab key, which is a little bit hard to see, but I can almost see in here, yes, there are tabs in between each of these fields. And it's really important to know what you have separating your fields. We call that the delimiter. Now in this case, the delimiter is a tab, but it might be that if you have your data in a text file, you've separated the fields using maybe a comma or a semicolon or something like that. But identifying what that delimiter is really important, as you'll see over the next few steps. So I'm going to take this text file, I'm going to separate it up so it's nice and neat, and we're going to append it to our data that's currently in Tubble Trip. So let's close this file down. Let's go back to our external data tab, go over to new data source, from file, and we're going to select text file. And again, we just need to browse to where we have that text file stored. So there we go, Esprit de Tour trip import. I want to append to the bottom of Tubble Trip. Click on OK. Now, Acces hasn't done a great job here so far of splitting up these different columns. And that's because we haven't actually really told it yet how to split up these columns. So you'll see at the top, we've got delimited highlighted. So it says characters such as a comma or a tab separate each field. So that is the option that we want to choose. I'm going to click Next. And we now need to tell Acces what delimiter we're using. And it's correctly picked tab for me. If you have your data divided up in a different way, so maybe your fields are separated by commas or spaces or some other kind of character, you can also specify those in here. But with tab selected, you can see now my data looks a lot neater. So I'm fairly happy with that. Another important thing to select here is to say that the first row contains field names. So the first row where it says code, trip name, activity level, those are essentially our headings. They're not actually part of our data. I'm going to click Next. I want to import this to Toolbar trip, which is correct, and I'm going to click Finish. Now once Acces has finished importing the data, it's going to pop up this little step here. So it says Save Import Steps. So if this is something which I was doing fairly frequently, I might want to just select Save Import Steps and it will whiz me very quickly through this process the next time I go to do it with exactly the same settings that we've used. I'm not going to check that. I'm just going to click on Close. I'm going to double click to open Toolbar trip. And there we go, that data has been imported in. Now, of course, you can't see all of the descriptions. You may have to widen this column out a little bit. But that is how you can import your data from an Excel spreadsheet or from a text file into a current table. So that's it for this module. In the next module, I'm going to set you another exercise, so please join me for that. Hello again and welcome back to our course on Acces 2019. In this module, we're going to talk a little bit about backing up your database. So we're moving away from building our database because this is a really important step that I want to make sure you understand before we continue adding anything else. Now, once you start adding data to your database, you need to really make sure that that data is safe. Because let's face it, there are things that can go wrong. So for example, if you're working on a laptop and maybe you've started creating your database, if someone stole your laptop, then you'd probably be in a lot of trouble. It might also be the scenario that you're working away on your database and for some reason something gets broken or stops working. So you want to make sure that you have a backup copy of your database. Now, one of the advantages of Acces is that everything is essentially stored in one AcDB file. So you don't really have to do anything other than keep a backup or a safe copy of that AcDB file. So all you really need to do is just copy the file on a regular basis. Now, a regular basis, that might mean different things to different people. So I would say if you use your Acces database every day and you're adding data and making changes, you really don't want to lose a lot of data. So I'd probably suggest that you take a copy of that file every day if you're updating it every day. If you only use your Acces file occasionally, you might want to take a copy on a less frequent basis. You also might want to take a backup just before you make a major design change. So there might be many reasons why you might run a backup, and I do highly recommend that you do this so that you don't lose any data. And there's a really good help topic that tells you how to back up and also how to restore your database. So here is that help topic, and all I've done is going to help and search for protect your data with backup and restore processes. So I would recommend that you have a read through here. And as you scroll down, you can see in this article, we have things like it will tell you how to plan regular backups, backup a database, backup a split database, restore, and also restore objects in a database as well. So I would recommend that you have a little read through this and implement your own schedule of backups, be they weekly, monthly, daily, whatever suits you for how often you use your database. So I'm just going to close down that help topic, and I'm just going to show you very quickly how I might save off or back up this night movies database. And it's very simple. It's really just a save process. So we're going up to File, we're going down to Save As, and you can see in our Save Database As options, we have an option for Backup Databases. I'm going to click Save As. And what Acces will do is it will take me to my local folders. And again, you can just browse and select a folder if you want to. You might want to have a specific folder that you've created for backups. And the only difference here is that if you look at the file name, you can see that it's given it a date. And this is really useful because it tells me when I saved this file. So if I'm looking to restore a file, that date's going to be very useful to me. So essentially all you're doing there is really just taking a copy of the AcDB file. So nice and straightforward. But as I said, do have a read through all of those help options so you fully understand and can implement a backup process. So that's it for backing up. I will see you in the next section. Hello again and welcome back to our course on Acces 2019. In the preceding section, we talked a lot about backups and the importance of backing up your data. And as I mentioned, it is essential to do this before you start investing too much time in creating your database. And over time, Acces databases can become what we might call bloated. And also over time, you might find that your database gets broken in some way. Now, I've mentioned this previously in relation to restoring your database, but sometimes it is possible to repair a database without having to restore it entirely. So we're going to talk about the compact and repair option in this module. Now, as always, I'm going to refer you to the help topic for some further reading. So here is the help topic, and you can see there I've just searched for compact and repair. And again, I would suggest that you have a little read through this, as it will talk you through exactly what you need to do and the steps you need to take before you start to compact and repair a database. So lots of information in there for you to read, and also some very explicit instructions on how you can do that. Now, let's just talk very quickly about what we mean by Acces databases getting bloated. As you start or begin to add data into your database, obviously that file is going to grow with use. So the AcDB file gets bigger and bigger over time. When you do things like delete records from your database, the space is not automatically reclaimed. It just occupies kind of what we call empty space. And there are also pieces of coded data within your Acces file that Acces uses. And over time, we get this effect called bloat. So what we want to make sure that we do is that we remove the unused bloated space, essentially, and we use the compact and repair options to reduce the size and improve performance. Now, this is also useful if you have a file that's become corrupted, and if a database file does become corrupted, sometimes Acces will realize this and it will prompt you to repair the file, which is absolutely fine. However, sometimes it doesn't prompt you, so you might carry on working for days, weeks, months without realizing that your file that you're working on is actually corrupted. So one way of dealing with this is to run a compact and repair. And really, you should run this not only when you're prompted to run it, but also as part of a general regular maintenance procedure. So I'm going to show you now how you can access that compact and repair option. So let's close down help, and I'm going to jump across to database tools. And you'll see the first option there is compact and repair, so fairly straightforward. You can also access the same option in the Backstage area. So let's go up to File. And you can see on the Info tab, we also have the same Compact and Repair Database button. So either of those will do the job. Now, what I would say is that before you do run a compact and repair, and this kind of harks back to the previous module, that you do a backup before you do a compact and repair. Compact and repair is usually successful, and it will certainly compact the data and repair any problems. But it's always good to be able to go back just in case something goes wrong. So do make sure that you take a backup before running this option. Another point worth noting is that you should only really do a compact and repair when you have the database open for exclusive use. And what I mean by that is if you're sharing this file and lots of people or maybe just one other person are working on it, then doing a compact and repair could be pretty dangerous. So you want to make sure that before you run a compact and repair that you are the only person who's working on the database. Now there is a way that you can check that. So maybe you're not sure if you are the only person and you want to check to make sure that that is the case. So I'm going to show you how you can check that very quickly. Now the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to close this Night Movies database so that I just have Acces open. I'm going to go to File, down to Open, and I'm going to click on Browse. I'm going to find my file, which is this one just here, and instead of doing a straight open, what I'm going to do, so I'm going to click that drop down, and you can see there that we have an option for Open Exclusive. Now what this means is if I select this option, the file will only open if I am the only person using that file. So it's a good way to check that you are in fact the only person who's currently in that file. And there we go, my file is open, so I know that it's just me who's working in this file, and I can then go in and run my compact and repair database safely. Now one other option I want to point out to you before we leave this topic is in Acces Options. So let's go to File and down to Options. And I'm going to jump across to that current database area. And I just want to highlight to you this option just here in the middle of the screen, Compact on Close. And what this means is that compact and repair will run every time you close the database. Now, I would say to proceed with caution with this, you should really only set this if you know that you're the only person who uses this AcDB file. But that can be a way of keeping everything simply very small and tidy on a regular basis, but just be aware that you have to be the only one using it. So finally, I would just urge you to read through that help topic on compact and repair and implement a regular schedule for running it. That's it for this section. I will see you in the next one.
If you're not a subscriber, click down below to subscribe so you get notified about similar videos we upload. To see more Microsoft Access 2019 videos, go ahead and click over there. And click over there to upgrade to the full Access 2019 beginner course.